So we're going to continue on page 32, starting near the top. Kind of pick up a little bit of what we were talking about last week. The reason being it's kind of a transition, but also a lot of questions came up from people either after class or during the week. So apparently with all these devices here, other people are listening in. And they have questions, and we get out of here so fast they can't ask them, so then they ask me during the week, either by email or calling or stopping me. So a lot of questions came up about this passage of no thought, and so I thought we'd go into that a little bit tonight. So the Sixth Patriarch is talking about, if we look at page 31, he's talking about a exercise, and it's not just a contemplative exercise, it means a state of being, a way of being in your life. And he says when you contemplate and illuminate with this wisdom, the wisdom that you already have within you, and you use this, then it completely penetrates both inside and outside, and we talked about that. And he said, and then you can also at the same time discern your original mind, your fundamental awareness. Recognizing, and then moving on, recognizing this, both this mind and its capacity, so both are implied here. You're able to see this unobstructed, unimpeded, natural capacity for wisdom, and you're able to use it. And he said this is really the basic liberation. This is what it means to be free in the deepest sense. And this liberation itself is Prajna Samadi. This is no thought. So he makes two statements here. On one hand, he says, this liberation, this functioning, this use of wisdom that is intrinsic 24/7 is in fact a kind of samadhi. It's a kind of contemplative, if you want to use that, equanimity. It's a way of being that is at all times clear, discerning, responsive, but nowhere attached or setting up. And so he's defining Prajna Samadi as not as a state of withdrawal from reality or as a state of innervating one's senses, but in fact a heightened exercise of their use, but at the same time they're being used without any obstruction of greed, anger, desire, any affliction. And then he says this is no thought. So this is the part that a lot of people got hung up on. Well, I shouldn't say hung up on because we're meant to get hung up on it. So if you got hung up on it, it's actually served its purpose. This is my interpretation of the text, but I'll explain that in a little bit. But this is what the Chinese says. Okay, we're not making this up and putting that in there it actually says no thought. The way to get at this in translating or interpreting is to put it in the context of what comes before and what comes after, and then you can understand what it means or what it doesn't mean. So if you were to be leaning towards the more immediate sense of this, no thought, it sounds like a blankness. It sounds like a shutting down of the mind, which in English is what it might convey. But then if you look before that, he's saying clearly penetrating both inside and outside, original mind. So this doesn't seem to be something that's dull and dormant, but rather something that's alive and active. It's a penetrating perception. And now let's go on to see what he says about this, because this becomes important. He says, what is no thought? If you can view all dharmas with an unattached mind, this is no thought. The mind is everywhere engaged, but is nowhere attached. Now this contextualizes this to something other than an absence of mental activity or even an absence of activity. Viewing all dharmas means all phenomenal, all conditioned things. And this is not only the external world, but it's also the projections and setting up of ideas, of this and that, It's referring to the whole conscious apparatus as it works to create and structure, actually sometimes called mental constructions or imaginings. That's another interesting one I came across as a translation. I don't know how to pronounce I think it's oh, give it to me. Prapancha, thank you. That was close. It's a P word in Sanskrit. And prapancha means this mental constructions of the consciousness as it attaches to external things and internal states and then turns them into something. And it's an imagined reality that we live in, and this is called basically the sleeping state of being, or the unawakened state, the confused state. And so the goal of cultivation is to liberate one's mental functionings, one's emotional functionings from this grasping, attaching, and setting up, construction, and let it be in its natural state, unattached, unsetting up. So that's what he meant earlier when he says, let the mind be unattached, clinging, imagining, constructing nothing. That's the state of the awakening. As soon as you go out to make, construct, or cling, you create something that seems to be real. I'm not saying it's not there, but it actually has no substance whatsoever any more than a dream, an illusion, a bubble, and shadow. They're also real, but they're also not real. And this is the same way with these. So when he says the mind is everywhere engaged, nowhere attached, now he's describing what you would be like if you were in the state of no thought. Okay? He is actually saying, I'm going to tell you, your mind is freed up. It's everywhere engaged. It's completely aware, and yet it's nowhere grasping or attaching. See, the difference is we have our minds are usually everywhere engaged, right? I mean, we are multitasking all the time. Just look at the way people drive. Someone just got arrested for taking selfies of themselves going down the freeway. Everywhere engaged. You know, she had the radio on, she had kids in the car, and she was sitting there driving, taking selfies of herself, weaving all over the road. The cop pulled alongside. She wasn't totally ever engaged because she didn't see him and almost ran him over. But we think when we use our mind in this frantic, outgoing, grasping way, we are everywhere engaged. But the problem is we are everywhere attached as well. And so it becomes a source of tension and anxiety because our mind cannot grasp and attach to all the things we're engaged in. And we go to sleep exhausted. We wake up with this frantic energy ready to go again. We everywhere engage, everywhere attach. At the end of the day, we have nothing. We go back to sleep. We wake up and do this again and again and again. And we get older and tireder doing this. And what this is saying is you are everywhere engaged and aware and alert, but there's nowhere you're grasping, attaching, holding on, and merely actually setting up your identity. This is mine. This belongs to me. This is not mine, and so forth. So that's a freedom. That's why he calls it liberation. And then he's saying this activity, when you're in this state, the full function of your capacity, your consciousness now is liberated. It's unleashed. And it can do, and that's why they use the word meow, wondrous things. They use the word wonderful or wondrous, meaning it's almost ineffable, inconceivable, only because we're so long accustomed to the narrow conceptualizations in the world we live in. When this opens up, it's like this wonder that goes. And one of the texts says, and then from wonder to wonder, your life opens, existence opens, following this. And there's no boredom, there's no ennui, there's no angst. It's just like everything is just a wonderful curiosity because the fullness of your being now is operating as it's meant to be, which he says is meant for great things, a great capacity. So I want to be clear. You know, you're thinking, well, why does he use no? You know, why does he need to say something like great thought or profound thought or inconceivable thought? There's many reasons for this, I think. Now I'll come back to that. You think about that. Whoa, sorry. Kind of think about it, which is sort of what I'm going to come back to, okay? So then he goes on to explain, just purify your original, let this original mind be pure so that the six consciousnesses, and this is a technical term for how human consciousness is presented or conceived within this system of thought as having 6 dimensions or 6, but they're really just one. And they talk about 6 and they talk about 7, they talk about 8. But just remember, these are descriptive terms of how it functions, but it's not like there's 8, actually. There's just consciousness. And consciousness functions in 8 ways, and it's doing it pretty much simultaneously and quickly. But to get a handle on it, to analyze it, some of the schools of Buddhist thought break it down into these lists or categories. And so the 6 consciousness is usually associated with the consciousness concerning the eyes, consciousness concerning the ears, the nose, the tongue, the body, and that's what's called manas, or sometimes 6 consciousness, which is the discriminating, discerning consciousness that's usually available to us. It's what we do our taxes with, what we surf channels with, what we dream with, and so forth. That's the 6th. And what we take exams with, and what we use when we flunk exams. It's all in the 6th there. And the 6 gates mean the 6 sense organs, the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and then whatever that organ is, that organ, it's not really an organ where the mind works. And these are called the gates. So it's kind of like a metaphor. You have these sense faculties, which are the gates, and they have consciousnesses associated with them that link them to the objects of consciousness, which are what is seen, what is heard, what is smelled, and so forth, what is thought or imagined. So these are called sometimes the 18 realms. And this is a Buddhist way of looking at the functioning of human consciousness, okay? So instead of saying the mind or consciousness, which we can use, they actually get very specific and say, here's how it functions. And if you look at it this way, you can actually get a little insight into it. You can break it down and kind of watch it. You can watch your consciousness as your eyes connect with certain sights and reject others. And you can see how a certain sight at one time, which is very alluring and attractive to you, with a change of consciousness, that very same sight becomes despicable and repulsive. And the sight hasn't changed, but your consciousness has. So this becomes a meditative technique you can use to watch your mind and your sense organs as they mix with the sense objects, and you start seeing how this is operating, how your consciousness is driving attachment, revulsion, wanting, craving, aversion, and so forth. And there's a constant shift going on. This thing is moving, dynamic all the time. This engine never stops, and it's constantly shifting and adjusting. And this is what they call the busy, mad mind in the Chan school, the monkey mind. And the monkey's there at the wheels, and it's got 6 gears, right, for the 6, you can do an analogy here, and it's got 6 windows, right, and it's got, this consciousness that's kind of streaming out, and the monkey's tree to tree, limb to limb, just grabbing, and this is how it works. He said, but if you don't let this happen, now this is what's interesting, he says, you do let them function. The 6 consciousnesses do go out the gates. He doesn't say shut the gates and close down consciousness. Yet they remain undefiled, meaning they do not unite with these things. They don't try to own them. They don't try to covet and crave and identify and set an identity, and do not intermix with the sensory objects. So this is a really important passage because he's defining here no thought. No thought you would think was, okay, I'll shut that thing down. I'll shut that machine down. I'll close the windows or roll them up, and I will close off my sense organs. And I will bring my consciousness to some inner, dark, unmoving space, what you think is samadhi. Okay? The still, quiet, deep samadhi. And then you won't be aware of anything, therefore you'll be undefiled. And he's saying, no. Do not try to do that. Not only will it probably not work, but it'll really mess your mind up. Because it's not meant to operate that way. And then he says, if you do that, you let them come and go without being defiled or intermixing. And defiled simply means taking this original purity, the unattached, unbound mind, and you defile it by adding to it something that doesn't really increase or augment it in the least, but actually diminishes it by your attaching to it. You've now made yourself something that truly you can't hold on to, you can't identify with, but you think you can, and so everything gets murky and muddy. And so this is this feeling of the more we accumulate, the less free we feel. There's a kind of anxiety associated with the urge to accumulate. Now, I'm talking about consciousness, of course, but you can just say this doesn't have a duality with things, wanting things. The wanting of things, the wanting to accumulate, the wanting to grasp is part of working, and it doesn't produce a liberated, necessarily peaceful feeling, but a kind of constant, free-floating anxiety. I don't quite have what I want. I want a little more. I don't know exactly what it is, but I'll know it when I get it, and yet when I get it, I don't feel satisfied. And it's like, and that's how that consciousness works, and that's what he means by defiled. It's stirred up. It's murky. It's muddy. Okay? He's being descriptive here. He's not being judgmental and saying, you are defiled. He is saying, no, you've just murked up your waters. Your naturally clear waters now are not clearly because they're stirred up, grasping, and moving in this way. And then he says, coming and going freely. This is a really interesting line. Penetrating without obstruction. I mean, coming and going, they're fluid. You are seeing, you're observing, you're hearing, you're smelling, you're tasting, you're thinking, and at the same time, because you're not setting up anywhere and grabbing onto anything, it's a free coming and going. It's fluid. Things arise, things happen, you go and respond, and things are quiet, you return. And the going and returning don't have a border. They don't have a splitting off. This wonderful spontaneous functioning. And that he compared earlier to water, flowing water. It's just not obstructed. And he says this is Prajna Samadi, freedom and liberation. And this is the practice of no thought. He means this is what it means to cultivate no thought. So where you go with this is like, oh, so this isn't something you think about. No thought. Got it. I was thinking, once I remember at the monastery, the master would go around we're doing, like at Friday night here. Okay, so we're all sitting here Friday night. You're all really quiet, by the way. It's really good sitting. Or the ones that are sleeping aren't snoring, so it's still, I don't know what's happening. We would be sitting there like that, and he would go around and say, so what are you doing? What's up? It's like Zamyang. And, I didn't do this, somebody else did. I made my own boo-boos, but, and he said, I'm sitting here thinking nothing, Shifu. Oh, wow, the master said, Buka Sa'i, that's really inconceivable. And then he asked him, are you thinking that you're not thinking anything? And he said, And he said, well, that very thought that you're not thinking is itself a thought. Boom. Stayed over. So obviously, not thinking is not it, and how would you know you're not thinking if you're not thinking? So it's like, it's not just a logical paradox, it's psychologically a paradox. It doesn't work, you can't. And you're not supposed to. So do not go away tonight say, I went to this class and the ultimate goal is to not think. I mean, don't do that. I come every Friday night and I'm practicing not thinking. And I'm not really good at it, but I'm getting better, I think. No. It's not about that. It's not about stopping your mind. Here, let's read on. Because you're thinking I'm making this up. No. If you do not think anything at all, to repress and eradicate thought, this is called Dharma bondage, Dharma prison. And it's an extremist view. It means it goes outside the norm, the middle way. And so here he is actually not just theoretically bringing up something and saying, hey, you heard me say no thought, and I explained what it was, it's free, uncovered, moving, and so forth, but you might think that it means repressing your thoughts and consciousness. And he said, actually, this is not liberation, it's bondage. So you have to be careful here. If it goes out, if your 6 sense organs are going out all the time, driven by this hungry, thirsting, trishna consciousness, that is not freedom and liberation. That's the anxiety of outflowing. So that's not right. But if you think just holding it back and cutting it off and restraining it is then the liberation, that's not it either. So where is it? And you don't say somewhere in between. Like, well, in the morning I go on the outflow, in the afternoon I pull it back. You know? And it all kind of evens on the end. No. That's not the middle way. That's not what it means. He means that you're able to let it go in and out without seeking, without grasping, without attaching. So it's neither shutting it down nor just letting it run wild. Wow. And that's the middle way. So he's not saying this because it's sort of like, oh, somebody might. People actually did at his time and do today and did at the time of the Buddha misinterpret this practice as a shutting down of awareness and consciousness and thinking that by a sort of, in a sense, death of consciousness, a muting of the senses and the awareness, they could gain liberation. Some did it by repressing the body to extreme asceticism that felt like if I have no craving for food, if I endure the elements like an animal, if I live in the wilds, nothing can move me physically, I become like a tree, a stump, and so forth, I will be liberated. So this kind of physical mortification, if you want to call it, was one path that people were doing. They're saying, oh, my mind is this pure thing within the body, the temple, and if I can just get this temple out of the way, all that would be left is pure consciousness. And so they would push this to an almost kind of near-death type of existence, where the oblivion of the sense organs became the constant state, and there was literally no feeling, no sensation, and then misperceived this to be this liberation. And the Buddha himself, at his time, began to experiment with this because that was what was available for people seeking liberation. And some of his teachers that he early went with in groups were practicing this sort of mortification of the flesh. And it's in the Western tradition, by the way, too. It's not just, oh, this is Indian or Asian. We still have a tradition of our mind and our body being two different things. Right? We talk about our body, we talk about our mind. The flesh is willing, but the mind is weak. Oh, today my body, today my mind. We have this duality. And we even have traditions that say the body's impure, it's a prison for the soul, and by really getting that body knuckled down into almost a repressive, no-feeling state, we will then liberate the soul to be free. And in fact, some people think that's what happens with death. So they think immortality is the soul, they imagine, which is another prapancha. Yeah, prapancha, is going to somehow then go off without the body. Of course, when they imagine where it goes, it's back in the body again because it's really a delightful heavenly place with pools and virgins and all this sort of stuff. But they don't, the disconnect doesn't go there because if it's just pure consciousness, no body, what would there be to enjoy? Oh, well, So read Plato if you want to get a sense of this. This is one of the earliest philosophers who present this mind-body dualism. But I'm not going to go to Plato tonight. So we go back. Even at the Buddha's time, there were those who were doing this. And some would then feel that this was a liberation. Or others would get into a closing down of consciousness itself to the point where it became almost like you weren't perceiving, you weren't even perceiving, you weren't perceiving. This sort of high state of conscious oblivion, consciousness stilling, stopping, no perceptions whatsoever, and thought this was liberation. And the Buddha played with these. See, if you read the life of the Buddha, good versions, I'm not the one on, PBS. That's not a really good version, the movie versions. And what's the other one? With, not Brad Pitt, who is it? Keanu Reeves. What? Hey. Hey, come on. Two thumbs. Well, Keanu Reeves plays the Buddha. Do I say more? Don't do that movie. I would suggest you read Ashwagosha's Buddhacharita. That's pretty good. My Sanskrit friends tell me that he was sort of like the Shakespeare of Sanskrit, according to those who love him. In there, you'll see his early life where he goes to these various schools and teachers and tries to do it this way and realizes that they don't penetrate, they're not complete. And so he bounces off of these. So this was available then, and it's still in people's thought ways. Still people think today when they cultivate that it's like this a little bit. So they'll start to get in mortifying the flesh somewhat, and even to the point where they'll induce torturous things to the flesh, thinking this mortification will lead to a freedom from the body. Or they'll get into using meditation, and now this is what would be called a wrong or an off-center samadhi, where it's the suppression of consciousness, thinking that will be the gate of liberation. So this is not something that's past at all. And there's still people today within Buddhist circles who still don't quite understand what this meditation is as not being no thought. They actually will interpret no thought to being a suppression of consciousness. Yeah, I know you're wrinkling, but anyhow, he says, good and wise friends, one who realizes the Dharma, no thought, completely comprehends the myriad things, does not repress the myriad things, does not push the myriad things away, but comprehends them. Now, comprehension means you see them as they really are. It doesn't mean you just take them in like watching television, like, oh, cry, happy, blah, blah, blah. You see them as they really are. You see things as they really are. That's what it means to comprehend the myriad things. One who realizes the Dharma, no thought, sees the realms of the Buddhas. They know and see what the Buddha knows and sees. And this is not talking about kind of deities in some other world Buddhas. This is talking about those who have their minds fully aware and awakened. It's not about some being someplace else. This is just saying Buddhahood, Buddha, small b, is one who realizes, make real in their life the Dharma of no thought. That's a Buddha. And when you have that going, you will know and see what every Buddha of the past, the present, and the future has, is, or will know and see. It's a universal state of open awareness. That's what Buddhahood is. One who realizes the Dharma, no thought, reaches the stage of Buddhahood, meaning this is within the grasp of humans. Okay, so if I could a little bit, I wanted to talk about the no thought for some, maybe here, but maybe more for the ones who were asking me this week, because I didn't have a chance. One person asked me how I was riding my bicycle, and it was a very quick answer. So they said, does no thought mean non-attachment? And does non-attachment mean you don't care? And I said, no. And I kept going. So I will try to go into this a little bit. Let me say there's a rule of thumb that we were using, supported by the texts themselves when we were translating, and translating mostly out of the Prajna Paramita tradition, which includes the Heart Sutra, this particular sutra, the Vajra Sutra, and so forth. There's many sutras in this tradition. But in this tradition, there's this core concept of sunyata, or what we call emptiness. And that is the basis then for all of these other ideas of not this, not. It stems from this concept of emptiness. And this emptiness really is paradoxical because it means the same thing the Sixth Patriarch is talking about when he says the essential nature is whole and complete, it lacks nothing. That essential nature that's whole and complete, lacks nothing, is the same emptiness because there's nothing that needs to be added to it. There's nothing that needs to be sought. It is empty of any self-existing, dharmas, and it's empty in the sense that there's nothing needed. It is whole and complete. So empty doesn't mean empty in terms of nihilistically void or absent. It means nothing needed to be added, nothing more. This is the meaning of emptiness. It's actually, ironically, a fullness. A fullness. Okay? But why do they then present it as emptiness? Why don't they say the fullness? Well, here's what I'm going to try to say about that. If they said the fullness, everybody would be thirsting after the fullness. And in the thirsting after the fullness, you would fail to appreciate the wonderfulness of true emptiness. And so they have to do, both philosophically and psychologically, a language that causes you to stop. I'm serious. If you say, like we use bu-ar. Bu-ar. Is that right? Bu-ar. Xie. Okay. Bu-ar means not to. They say all the Buddha Dharma is a Dharma of non-duality, of not to. And when you attain buar, you're also in the state of wonderful existence. And then you go, if I said oneness, instead of buar, not two, if I said oneness or non-duality, I'm after oneness. I want oneness. You would start seeking oneness. It's almost like human nature to hear there's something really exquisite, it's called oneness. Or, and then you want oneness. But if you say buar, it's like, no, not two. What do I, you don't get anything, right? So it's a kind of a trick. So the rule of thumb, when you're translating, whether you use wuxian, which means, okay, my pronunciation notwithstanding, wuxian is no mind, okay? Wunian, no thought. Wuju, no attachment, no dwelling. Wuxiang, again, no thought or thinking. Okay. Wu wei, not doing. Wu wo, no self. Wait, woo, 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 on and on. Boo, 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 on and on. And you're going like, why do they keep doing that? And in fact, when we were translating this text, there's a technique used called, I got from colleagues of mine, what do they call? Concept clusters. So when you're translating, you find concepts that cluster around, like virtue, shila, morality, precepts, or wisdom, contemplation, insight, dhyana, and so forth. You find clusters, and the cluster that comes out of here is a bunch of woo, 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 boo, boo, boo. Like, why is there so many woos and boos? Why is that about? Back to, it means when he says, your essential nature is whole and complete, it lacks nothing, only that we misunderstand that do we search out wrong. And so every teaching he has is to stop the outside looking, stop the outside searching. So the use of the negative is to cause you to stop and awaken to the positive wholeness that's already there. That's why it has to almost psychologically be used. So when you translate, when you hear wu, just think it means no attaching to thought. Okay? Not attaching to a place. Because you say no place, then it means, well, I'm nothing. No. It means not attaching. So just stick in clinging, grasping, attaching. Graha, which is zhizhuo, the Chinese, comes from the Sanskrit, the graha, which means, literally, that's where our word grab comes from. Grab. Okay? Don't grab to your thoughts. Don't grab on your feelings. A place. Don't grab to identity. Don't grab to your youth. Don't grab to your possessions. Doesn't mean you don't have them. You use them, they come and go freely, but you don't. So the woo or the boo is simply telling you not to set up and grab on these things, but not to say that they don't exist. It's a very different approach. So what it would mean is then, woo or boo would mean clear, clean, not strained. That means not striving and trying. It would be natural. No ulterior motives. That's another way of saying woo or boo. Artless. No designs. True. Not clinging. Not egotizing. I just made up a word. Egotizing meaning putting your ego into it and then identifying with it. And this is the expression when they use someone who's no thought as a person of the way with no mind. It's a beautiful expression. The person, they're of the way, but they have no ulterior motive, no design, no attachments. This is no mind. They come and go freely. So the first thing then is to see boo or woo as no grasping, no attaching, no clinging. That's why sometimes we translated freedom from. So instead of saying no appearances, we say freedom from superficials, freedom from appearances, rather than not having that. And don't see it as absence void. That's the first thing, if that helps. And you'll see often in commentaries, that's exactly what the commentators say. It just means not attaching to it, not grasping. But the other one is, you could say, well, that's just kind of a language peculiarity of Chinese. But I don't think so. I think it has a philosophical purpose in doing this. And that was the other thing I was saying. If you state this is, that is, or oneness instead of, for example, non-dual, then you're setting something up to grab, to get a hold of. to possess and identify with. Whereas the core teaching, his core teaching, is to disentangle, to release the hold, to let go of this grasping and attaching. And then that reveals, by letting go, by not doing that, your natural wholeness, completeness, manifest all by itself. Because it's already there. It's not something you have to get. That's why, did we get to that part of the text? Not yet? When somebody asks later, they're going to ask the Sixth Patriarch, well, what's your core teaching? And he says, I have no teaching. Oh, there it is again. Bu, wu, fei, whatever. I don't have a teaching. And he says, I simply untie people's knots and call it a teaching. So he's not even saying I have a teaching. The teaching is, no. He just simply says, I untie people's knots, expediently find ways to untie their grasping, holding, clinging, and then I call it a teaching. But really, there's no need for a teaching unless you make the knots. So it's like once the knots are untied, there's no teaching. So it's like the philosophical, or you could say the psychological action of this teaching is letting go, divesting. Everybody know divest? It's the opposite of invest. Sometimes you invest, you're divested because your investments go bloop. But divest means to separate yourself from, let go, emptying out. And then your full function can go. So I think that's why the language is presented in this way, and it'll help when we get to this. Don't think of this every time you encounter no thought, no dwelling, no attachment, no marks, and so forth. See this as not this dull repressing of awareness or consciousness, but simply the exhortation to function freely by not identifying, attaching. And that changes the whole tenor of this. Otherwise, this comes in a mystical text of, empty, nothing, blah, 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 and then you're there. And it's really just gross misreading. So that's why I think the language is paradoxical and contradictory. And I was going to give some examples tonight. But the reason that it's done this way is, I think, to convey a new way of thinking to the reader, the listener. If I say no thought, no dwelling, no attachments, no. We're so used to thinking, getting, grasping, wanting, making our list, making our plans. Our whole life is this acquisitive longing going out. So much so that we don't even see that we're doing it. We just take it as this is what it means to be a human being, is to want and to crave and to get and to fear losing. And so, unless there's something that causes us to stop, we won't stop. Now, if there's moments when it does stop, and the texts talk about this. For example, if you have a near-death experience or an accident or something, for a couple moments, it stopped. You think, wow. Or if someone close to you dies and passes away, and you see them in that state, and you say, whoa, that's going to happen to me too. And you pause for a minute and say, so this frantic passage of life that I'm doing, what is this all about? You have a moment or two of contemplation, and by the next day it's gone. It just reverses and you move on. It's really amazing. People say, I just lost so-and-so. It's changed my life forever. And a week later, you would not know it. I'm sorry. And sometimes, my grandmother used to say this. She would use it in a kind of a gossipy tone, but she'd say, well, she remarried before her husband's body was cold. But it was a way of saying the grief was very fleeting. Okay, so it's language as you hear is to stop us and convey a new way of thinking and a new way of being. So it's meant to sort of hit us, make us pause, make us ponder, reconsider the habitual patterns and assumptions that we're operating from. That's why the text can use this and be good. So let me give you some examples. And this is that use of paradoxical language. So let me use from my favorite book I like, The Tao Te Ching. I'm just going to give you the English. If Yuan was alert, she could give us the Chinese. So this is from the first one. Dao ke dao, fei chang dao, right? That the Dao, the way that you can put a name or a tag on, is not the true unvarying way. So it's saying when you name it, it's the oneness, it's the path. Whenever you do that, You've turned it into something, and by turning it into something, you think it's something you can get, and therefore you're off the path immediately because you've turned it into something that you can grab it. So it's like paradox. Okay? The Tao never does, yet through it all things are done. Huh? Again, it's that contradictory. It doesn't do, yet all things are, and then it calls action that is actionless. I'm sorry, that's the Wu again. Wu Wei, action that is actionless. You're coming and going freely, but you're not setting up and attaching. That's another way of expressing it. Here's another way they go at it, and this is meant to stop you. To remain whole, be twisted. To become straight, let yourself be bent. To become full, be empty. Be tattered that you might be renewed, and so forth. It's this paradoxical language hitting at this. Those who have little may get more. Those who have a lot are perplexed. So that's why we see the ancients saying, then to remain whole, be twisted with no idle saying. And it's like, what does that mean? To be whole, to become twisted. Twisted means stopping the patterns. It doesn't feel comfortable. It's like an addiction when you're, I don't know, some of you maybe never had an addiction. Some of you might have had addictions. If you ever try to break an addiction, you know it's not comfortable. You feel twisted, you feel tattered. But that's part of that return. Okay? But if you go on with it, you feel whole. But in the end, then you really feel wasted. So this is part of the same thing. And then the line says, for true wholeness can only be achieved by return. And this is the Wu. True wholeness can never be achieved by going out, but by return. And here return means you release the hold, you renew, you refashion yourself. It's talking about self-cultivation. They also say it's reversing the flow, the habitual flow. And sometimes they use zhi guan, stopping and contemplating. See through and put it down. So that's why you have this language where you have stops and puzzles and pauses and prods you, because it's meant to challenge the habitual ways. So I think that's probably, I mean, I have wonderful other sections. I just went and found some of my favorites, but I think too much is the same as too little. So I'll stop with that as a thought here to really reify, I think, the positiveness of what he means by no thought, and the misunderstanding we could give to that. And so then you ask yourself, so what would a Buddha look like? This is the next question. What would a Buddha look like? Now, I know you're going to say, well, it would look like, and it might not. These are symbolic representations. These are not, by the way, actual photographs of the Buddha. In case you... And these are not actual sculptures of the Buddha. These are artistic, symbolic representations that are meant to convey certain qualities or characteristics, but these are not meant to be sort of like a Nikon picture. So then you have, based on this description, based on where we're going, what would a Buddha look like? Coming and going freely without obstruction, responding appropriately, in the world but not of the world. You just go, and what would that person look like? What would be the qualities and characteristics? It wouldn't be necessarily that you'd see all the halos and everything, but you would see. So I'm asking you, even though I say, we don't want to prapancha, do too much imagining, this is okay to sort of imagine, get outside the frame that says it's some golden deity standing on a lotus flower, in some land far away, and say, according to this text, and if it's out of the human, it's a perfection of the human, be a human being that shows and manifests these qualities and whatnot. That's an interesting contemplation, because it makes it more immediate. I told you when in India, we go to these different places where they'd have museums with Buddha icons, and I would all go, yeah, that's cool, that's cool, that's cool. And it wasn't cool because it's like it wasn't my artistic imagery that I grew up with. These were all very foreign-looking physical representations, long earlobes and big tops, and things shooting out. And then each country, each Asian country had a different Buddha image. You know what I mean? Like Burmese look like Burmese Buddhas, and Thais look like Thai Buddhas, and Japanese look like Japanese Buddhas. And I was like, well, where's a Buddha that looks like me? Well, I mean, you don't look like me, but, kind of. And then at Sarnath, in a museum, I'm going along, and all of a sudden I say, whoa, there's a Buddha that looks like me. And they have a wooden statue of a Buddha sitting there, and I tell you, it looked like Abe Lincoln. And I'm going, wow. No, it really looked like Abe Lincoln with just bad clothes on. And he was sitting there, really had an Abe Lincoln face and an Abe Lincoln beard, and normal hair, but obviously kind of cool, He'd be really cool. And I'm looking closely, and it's saying, representation of the Buddha, Ohio. So somebody made this in Ohio, sent it to Sarnath, and there was a museum there. Now, the interesting thing was, I sat there, whoa. Every other Asian was just like, walking by. Ooh, look at that one, look at that. No one was looking at Lincoln. Only I was looking at Lincoln. So what I'm asking you is get out of the mindset of visualizing this as some worldly manifestation, and see it that it is actually a manifestation and a fulfillment of our own humanity. And that probably the Buddhas will look very, very different, as we all look very, very different. But the inner qualities, the state of mind and consciousness, would be the same. And then the vibe, if you want to use that word, or the actions and the life of that person would be so ennobling, unblemished, uplifting, kind and compassionate, so forth. That's, I hear this expression, cut off desire, cast out love. That's what all Buddhas do. And, when we say that to people, it doesn't have an uplifting, edifying effect. I'm sorry, you say you cut off desire and you cast out love. And then it sounds like, and all you have left is this. This has no desire or love. Okay? I think if you do the boo-woo again with this, you get a different thing. If you say, let go of craving and coarse passions, and what's left? Compassion. Oh. In other words, the stopping of the coarse passions and the cravings do not produce an unfeeling, uncaring being, but you have now a compassion. So the compassion is whole and complete within. We cover it over with selfish, coarse cravings. Let go of those, what happens? Your compassion wells forth. So compassion isn't something you need to cultivate or to get. It's already whole and complete, but it too is being held in check by these negative emotions and whatnot. So if you see it that way, there's a whole different tone to it rather than just cut off and put down. It's like, let go of the narrowness of your being, and the fullness will open by itself. So that's how I would like to think of compassion. Compassion is not something you get or something you cultivate. It's what arises naturally and in a powerful feeling way without attachment when coarse grasping and passions are let go of. And it's just like that. However, my teachers say, however much of that you can let go of, this much will manifest. If you can let go of it all, the fullness of Buddhahood will manifest. But it's just like this teeter-totter. So I think the text is really important for us to psychologically get at what he's saying here, because now you can think of all the virtues: kindness, compassion, joy, equanimity, which are called the four Brahma Viharas, are whole and complete within. And then you ask yourself, how come they're not shining in me? And then you find out what's covering them, and you just rub that away. That becomes cultivation. Okay, so I'll stop there. So last story. So the master was talking about no thought, no false thought, no thinking. And then he said to Hong Shui and I, you two should keep a journal, do some writing when you do your bowing pilgrimage. And I thought, well, wait a minute. First he told us not to think. Now he's telling us to write. So I said, Hong Shui, let's go up and talk to him. I was like, okay. So he's sitting there in between the lecture and the high seat, and I said, Master, I have a question. He says, well, okay, what's your question? I said, you told us to write, but you also told us not to think. How can we And he looked at me and he said, so, and we had little steno notebooks there, and he said, yeah, use those. And I said, well, don't go any bigger, just that size. He said, because you can carry it on your hip in your monk's bag, and then if you have some insight or something, you bring it up and you just write it down. He says, I'll call that writing from the hip. But it's not thinking. And he said, it should be first thought. Don't embellish, don't edit, just let it be first thought. First thought is true thought. I said, aha, but it's still thinking, isn't it? And so he said, I'll give you a verse that you can contemplate. So I give you the verse here. Because obviously, I'm sure pretended he understood it because he was translating for me. But I don't think but I got to be the one that asked the question. So he said, with not a single thought generated, everything is perfectly clear. When the 6 organs move to grasp and attach, you're covered in smog. Oh, I said, okay. So, okay. And he says, correct in thought. Let me see. Correct in thought, you have no thought. You think, but keep no thought. And he said, that's enough. And I went back. So I was trying to think. So the last part was one that interested me. Correct in thought, you have no thought. In other words, you don't anticipate, you don't try to think of something, but when a thought arises, you don't keep it. And I was like, so that's kind of how it would work, I guess. But he wasn't saying no thought, and he wasn't saying think, but he's saying let it come so that there's a thought that's responsive, but don't keep it. Anyhow, I thought I'd share that with you. I'm still working on it. And I don't know if you can get through school that way. I've been trying to think. Or maybe the other way to think about, maybe we should have schools like that rather than the other way around. Okay, tonight that's enough. Any announcements? Sure, go ahead again.
So just a reminder, we will be going up to Oregon. There's a Buddhahood farm retreat from June 7th to the 13th. So we'll go up. It's a very
Tell
nice...
them what Buddhahood farm is, because it sounds like like a dairy or something.
Okay, it's like a forested property in Oregon, quite remote. So very natural, quite pristine, very beautiful. And we go up there for a week, meditate, kind of do community work, listen to Dharma teachings. It's led by Reverend Heng Sure. People are familiar. He'll be teaching. And we camp under the trees. So that it's a very nice retreat coming up June 7th to the 13th. And you can find more information. There's a flyer outside where the free books are, or you can go to oregon.berkeleymonastery.org to find out more.
So this is one attempt to, by using this pristine place up in Oregon where there's very bad cell reception, not much electricity, it's another woo-boo, woo cell phone, woo connection. You translate. It's imitating an older tradition, especially in East Asia, where some of the early monasteries were purposely set up in the deep mountains or in the forest to create an environment that you could find your own nature in nature, so to speak, so that the lack of distractions of the forest would be a stimulus to calm the mind and then find your own nature within it. And that's why many of the monasteries were called Lin, like Shaolin Si. Shaolin, Lin means forest. And so it was almost used identically if you talked about forest. Here he talks about the Brahma forest. It's another expression. And people think that this is metaphor, but actually, for a long time, this was actually true. So if you do tours, if you go to, you'll still see, even though the cities have encroached some of the oldest temples and monasteries were remote places in the deep woods or near natural sites that, kind of inspired closeness to the nature. So Oregon, fortunately America, we're blessed with a number of places like that. And in some ways, that's how Emerson and Muir saw the national parks. That's how they viewed the national parks. They saw them as our natural cathedrals. And it was in closeness to them that they saw the spiritual and future of humanity depending, was its closeness to nature. So we have a corresponding tradition here. So take advantage of Oregon if you can, and be prepared to not have good cell phone reception. Ooh. Let me transfer. May every living being, our minds as one and radiant with light, share the fruits of peace with hearts of goodness, luminous and bright. If people hear and see how hands and hearts can find in giving unity, may their minds awake to great compassion, wisdom, and to joy. May kindness find reward. May all who sorrow leave their grief and pain. May this boundless light break the darkness of their endless night. Because our hearts are one, this world of pain turns into paradise. May all become compassionate and wise. May all become compassionate and wise. Ding li san bao.